folks, this is Mick with Blitz TCG, and I was kindly asked to make a video for the ErgoSummit about Blitz, the adoption of Ergo with respect to Blitz, and really staying on the topic of adoption and blockchain use as a whole. So we're going to go off my dome for today. Not going to have any notes in front of me and sort of talk off the cuff here. Many of you have likely seen me speak at the various conferences that I've attended, and if not, this might be an intro to sort of some of my philosophy that you may or may not agree with. So we'll start with what Blitz is. Blitz is a digital trading card game that is utilizing Ergo and likely a couple other blockchains to facilitate the digital ownership and asset exchange for players, specifically for the trading cards. And in fact, trading cards are an excellent example of where a digital asset might be best used. As some of you know, there are plenty of examples out there where using the blockchain for a certain purpose doesn't really make much sense. And that's where I'll leave the shade for today. But ultimately, there are good use cases for blockchain, and there are use cases where existing technology would work just fine. And that's a fact. For blockchain, let's take a step back as we speak about adoption. When you think about blockchain, what is the blockchain, right? Ergo or not. All a blockchain is a public database. So when talking to people about blockchain, it might be worth, instead of saying, this public immutable ledger and all these buzzwords, to just say it's a database that is accessible by the broader public. It is a public database. And we'll say, well, what do you mean by that? And what you can say is, well, imagine if you had a hard drive where everybody could store all their content to it from all around the world and then view that content separately and trust that it was verifiably correct. And then maybe you take it a step further and you say, well, okay, Mick, that's kind of cool, but like, why is that important? Why does that matter? Well, if you take a step back and you look at where we're coming from with respect to the blockchain, there's a lot of shady shit going on. There's a lot of sort of capital greed, behind the table deals, data being shared inappropriately, maybe even your personal data, my personal data. And this concept of a public database, this public ledger, we'll go back to using the word ledger now, is a novel way to keep track of those different transactions, right? So transactions is a very broad term, but in the blockchain space, it's very similar to that. It's just the fact that I'm sending something from point A to point B, and perhaps something from point B is being sent back to me, or something from point C is being sent back to me. And so, where I'm going with this is those shady deals, those sort of behind the scenes notions that we're all used to, they don't have to be that way, right? So in reality, one could have made those public to begin with. Some things should certainly still be private, but there's a lot of things out there with respect to data transfer and especially monetary transfer that makes sense to be up for public review. Of course, with some layer of privacy on top of it, i.e. your name probably wouldn't be associated, but maybe your wallet address would. But that is still enough of a level of perhaps privacy that still protects some of your personal exchanges. That all being said, this notion of a public database, a digital ledger of transactions, it makes people nervous. It makes the government nervous. It makes banks nervous, because what do these people ultimately do for us? Venmo, PayPal, they just facilitate the trust aspect of being able to send something from point A to point B. But what if you didn't have to use a middleman to establish that sort of bucket of truth, that bucket of trust? What if you could just trust that it was going to work by necessity of how the technology functions? And that is ultimately what blockchain provides. So that's just I like to start there when I have the opportunity, because ultimately, if you don't understand blockchain, none of this really matters. I could tell you anything that you want about Blitz, but if you don't really understand why it matters in the first place, none of these videos that you watch today or tomorrow or whenever will ultimately mean anything to you. Why would they? So Blitz, let's now divert off my soapbox here and let's talk about Blitz. So Blitz is a trading card game that is making use of blockchain technology for only the thing that I think blockchain technology is useful for, which is that exchange of assets. So in a video game, you'll see all these hype bubbles about blockchain gaming and honestly all this bullshit that people try to shove down your throat. It's half of the reason why gamers hate it. It's half of the reason why if you go on any Reddit forum and talk to any gamer about anything related to blockchain, they'll just call you a clown, a scammer. People like Logan Paul and others have only helped push that mantra and that sort of feeling towards blockchain. But it's also all of our fault too, right? We let these most of these like useless NFTs run rampant. They've seen rug pulls. They've seen awful things happen. And oftentimes it's because people are trying to use the blockchain for something that it's like actually not that useful for. So let's talk about Blitz. Like why would a card game, not just Blitz, why would any card game perhaps help with adoption of blockchain technology? Well, let's start with video games in general. So we'll use Hearthstone. I think many are familiar with Hearthstone, but you could replace this with RuneScape, really any online video game. So with Hearthstone, it is a Blizzard created trading card game, created many years ago at this point. And the way that you play the game is with trading cards, digital trading cards. And essentially you buy packs, you open these packs of cards, and you get 5 digital cards. And those cards are stored on your Blizzard account. So if you log in at your friend's house or you log in at your mom's house or whatever, it moves with you because it's on Blizzard servers, it's connected to your account. But here's a notion that most people don't really think through, and it has happened before. It happened with World of Warcraft Classic servers. It happened with old school RuneScape servers. What if that company decides that they no longer want to support the game? I mean, well, you're shit out of luck. Also saw this with Overwatch to Overwatch 2 to some degree with the Overwatch skins and how they handled all that. You're kind of out of luck, right? Because that company, you don't really own that information. You might have purchased it and it might be on your account, but you don't really own it. So as soon as that company decides to shut down their servers, you lose it. It's gone, right? Like you might have invested hundreds of dollars into that game, hundreds of hours into that game, and essentially everything you owned is now gone. So what the blockchain allows, right, is basically if I decide to shut down my game and my game's still open source, any developer could go spin back up Blitz and then you could still use your same wallet address with your same assets to play the same game. But let's again shift back to adoption. Adoption, to get people to use a blockchain, one, there must be trust in what you're actually doing. There must be trust with the people doing it. The users have to trust that they're not going to be rugged like they were with Logan Paul. They have to trust in the technology that it's actually stable and it makes sense for whatever problem you're trying to solve. So if you're not trying to solve a problem, the technology is pretty useless. And so this brings me to why I'm using Ergo for Blitz. Ergo is a blockchain built on principle. It's built on a firm foundation, and it's built on a community that prefers to do their own research, not just the meme version of it, but literally go do their own research before trying to have an opinion. So I was very much attracted to the Ergo ecosystem because it is built on sort of the foundational principles of what blockchain was meant to be, what Bitcoin was meant to be. And then all Ergo really did is just put a better technological face on top of it, right? We implemented better smart contracts or just smart contracts in general when compared to Bitcoin. And we made really Kushti and these original developers made a platform that had low fees that the miners could influence, right? Ultimately, put the power back in the people's hands is a way to think about it. It's a blockchain for the people. And I think at the end of the day, if the blockchain you support doesn't have that mantra, I'm not sure why it's a blockchain in the first place, right? Like why have you even made a blockchain if it's not supposed to bring the power back to the people? That was kind of the whole point. That's why blockchains like Solana that are majorly VC funded, they get so much flack and so much pressure. But anyways, I'm getting off topic again. For Blitz, Ergo is very important to me. I did a round of investigation into different technology platforms, different blockchains, to see what blockchain made the most sense for Blitz. And there were a lot of options. There were a lot of bigger options, frankly. And maybe to some degree, some might say even more mature options. Maybe safer options in a way, because these small cap coins sometimes just disappear one day. But I was very quickly brought into the technical fold of Ergo. I found a lot of support in the community, and it really made me feel like I was one of the Ergonauts very, very quickly. Like within a month of posting on Reddit and asking people questions, I already had access to like proper blockchain developers, which would have never happened on some of the bigger blockchains. And I think that's sort of a warning to some of the bigger blockchains. A lot of your communities are sort of echo chambers, and they don't really let new blood in very easily. So it's something that I think Ergo should keep an eye on as well, to make sure we also never do that. But that all said, Ergo is a firm foundation for what I want Blitz to be, which is a better example of how blockchain technology can be used to facilitate digital ownership for players. And that's really the short of it. Players will be able to utilize their Ergo wallet address, the Ergo blockchain, to open packs of cards, receive card tokens. These aren't NFTs. These are proper blockchain fungible tokens on the Ergo platform. They just have a lot of attributes similar to NFTs, so they have like images associated with them, but they are not NFTs, right? Like one Blitz Charizard is the same as any other Blitz Charizard. There isn't like some weird 002 on the end of it that makes it twice as much money as the one that's 004. There's no concept of that in Blitz. They're all fungible tokens, just like in real life, right? Like a Charizard from the base set of Pokemon is the same as a Charizard from the base set of Pokemon. $1 is equal to $1 sort of philosophy. And Ergo certainly supports that and facilitates it. Furthermore, it also has allowed me access to developers in a community that have let me sort of bring a different notion to light, which is what if, like many times when you open a pack of Pokemon cards, you throw away like 10 of them, you keep 2 of them. It's sort of a waste of paper and a waste of money to some degree. So the blockchain also, from a digital standpoint, as long as you let the users own their assets, there's this notion of being able to burn tokens in exchange for another token. So users in Blitz, like let's say you have 10 of the same card, you're like, man, I don't really want to go through the process of selling this card on the auction house or on a Sky Harbor NFT / token selling platform. You can just burn them. You can just burn those extra cards and get what we're calling the Blitz token in return. And so it's a pretty cool idea where there's no pre-mine at all. It's essentially just a token dispensing system that only dispenses tokens when a card is burned. So the starting supply is 0, and it only generates more supply as players burn more cards. So it's actually a fair start blockchain in a way. It's almost like a mini blockchain within the Ergo blockchain, where we're just calling it proof of burn internally. And then pretty cool thing too, you can build a halving mechanism into it, kind of like Bitcoin and Ergo, where after a certain number of cards are burned, the rewards are halved. So it really is acting like a deflationary system for trading cards themselves. And the last thing I'll say about adoption, because we covered open source, we covered what it means to be a blockchain, we covered why Ergo. The last thing I'll say, and it's a little bit complicated to explain, and I highly recommend checking out one of my other videos where I have some visuals to go along with it. But if you use this notion of fungible tokens instead of NFTs, what it lets you do with your game is take whatever assets are in your game that are fungible tokens, and because there's a consistent identifier for each of those assets, like one machine gun is one machine gun or one Charizard is one Charizard. Let's say you're developing a fighting game and you want to use my character, one of my characters, which is Margot. And typically there'd be some IP that you would have to go through with me to be able to use that character in your game. Just because it's open source doesn't necessarily mean you're allowed to use everyone's digital assets in an environment that they weren't ever meant to be used in. That's a little bit of a misunderstood nuance. So typically you'd have to, it's almost like you couldn't use Mickey Mouse in a fighting game, right? So typically you'd have to talk to me about it. We go through all this stuff. But for Blitz, there's going to be none of that, because the only requirement to use any of Blitz's IP, characters specifically, is that if you put one of my characters in your card game or in your fighting game or in your RPG, whatever, the way that a user gets access to that character is by owning one of the original Blitz tokens of that character. So now let's take a step back. What does that really mean? Well, what if, instead of what we have now, which is all these private databases of all these private games, we just have this community of games where all their assets are just sort of stored on the blockchain? Well, that would mean that through partnerships and collaborations, you as a user could buy a pack of Blitz cards, get a Margot, and then that unlocks Margot in a fighting game. That unlocks Margot in an RPG. That unlocks Margot in Blitz. It unlocks Margot in some version of Blitz that somebody took my open source code and stood up and they called it the better Blitz because they hate the way that I made the game. And you can do all sorts of really cool stuff and grow adoption in that manner. You can spread the idea of the blockchain. And that's kind of what I'm trying to, I've rambled a bit, but really the idea I'm trying to paint in your head that I hope you can share with people when you get the opportunity is that the idea of the blockchain wasn't ever meant to be paywalls. It was actually meant to be accessibility. And we've moved away from that. And we need to move back to it if we ever want the broader community to actually see it as a better technology for the things that they care about, sort of like video games. So I hope that Blitz sets that example. It might mean I don't make as much money as some of these other projects. But ultimately at this point, it's almost like writing a book. I'm happy with how the project has turned out. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to have worked with the great people in the Ergo community. And I hope that one day Blitz is able to meet everybody's expectations. I won't walk away from it until I'm confident it was the game that I said it would be. So anyways, thank you all for following Ergo and supporting the community. Please do support the Ergo Foundation, the ErgoSummit efforts. Continue to post on Twitter and keep up the good work out there. See you all later. Bye-bye.